Thanks for tuning in to Let Fear Bounce. What are we going to be doing here? We're going to be tossing out nuggets of hope. And who the heck am I? My name is Kim Langley, and I will be your host. And I am so glad that you're joining me today. So sit back, relax, grab that cup of coffee, and let's get this show started. Have you ever thought about what will happen to your pet should you no longer be able to care for them or if you pass away? Life Pet Care is the world's first pet care administration company, and they provide do-it-yourself pet estate will kits. Now, these are legal document, folks. They are considered an amendment or a codicil that you add directly to your personal will. You can access this by visiting kimlanglingauthor.com. Scroll down until you see Life Pet Care. Click on that link and you will get 33% off of that do-it-yourself pet estate will kit. Now, folks, it's just $29.99, but if you click that link, you will get 33% off. Let's make sure that our furry loved ones are taken care of if, for whatever reason, we are no longer able to care for them. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Let Fear Bounce. This is your host, Kim Langling, and I am so glad that you are joining me for just a small part of your day today, along with my special guest, Captain O, otherwise known as Captain Reyné O'Shaughnessy. I am so pleased to have her on today. Captain O'Shaughnessy, she is the founder of Piloting to Wellbeing and recently co-founded Aviation Health and Wellbeing Institute. Both organizations are founded on the premise that they focus on providing a new vision of aviation safety, performance, and learning. She is also the published author of This Is Your Captain Speaking, What You Should Know About Your Pilot's Mental Health. Captain O'Shaughnessy, she has served as a commercial airline pilot for over 34 years. Captain O'Shaughnessy, or Reyné, welcome to Let Fear Bounce.
Oh, thank you, Kim. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
No, I've been excited to have you on for quite some time because you are on a mission, lady, and I've been able to witness this mission and all the passion that you put into it as a pilot yourself, and you're a voice for pilots out there who may be struggling or may not be sharing their voice. But I want you to share with the listeners what your mission is and why you began this mission for pilots in the aviation community.
Wow, that's a very good question. Let me start out with, I had a mental health crisis in my own life. And when I say mental health, it wasn't mental illness, but my mental health crisis, if I didn't acknowledge it and take care of it, then it could have turned into mental illness. So through that journey and the healing from that journey, I wondered if there were people out there just like me that needed to have a voice or have a platform where it was safe. And so after I retired, I've been retired now, I wrote the book, and the book is has been viewed on Fox, NBC, and other affiliates. I wanted to make sure that my mission was heard because not only in aviation, but more so in aviation, we could not talk about our mental health. Mental health was something that other people had and aviators didn't because we have the right stuff, right? But because of the system that pilots work in, we suffer more than the general population. And since COVID, these are pre-COVID numbers, depression and anxiety are very high. 284 million people suffer from depression. Approximately 40 million suffer from anxiety. So not only is my mission for aviators, but it's for any high performance role, such as first responders, nurses, teachers, and oh, by the way, anyone that has stress in their lives.
Which is everyone at some point. So I have a question here. Now, the tagline of your book, share that again with the folks.
Yeah. The tagline is what you should know about your pilot's mental health.
Now that caught my attention when I first received a copy of your book, well, close to a year ago. That caught my attention because as someone, I'm not a pilot, but as someone who flies and has flown, you never think about it because you just assume that, hey, this pilot and his co-pilot, they've got a whole bunch of souls in their hands. And you just assume when you walk onto that airplane that all is well, everything's going to be okay. I'm trusting this total stranger that I never even see because he or she is behind a closed door. You just don't think about it. And when I read your book and started getting to know you more and your mission more, it really opened my eyes. And I can only assume that a lot of the listeners, how often, I'll throw this question at the listeners, how often have you thought about your pilot's mental health?
Yes. Mental health, and the reason I chose the tagline is, of course, you want to get people's interest like yours. uh, Mental health is not mental illness. So when I chose the tagline, what you should know about what your pilot's mental health, I want everyone to know that your pilot struggles just like anyone else. And that I wanted to raise the public's awareness that we can't talk about our mental health, which causes a shift in how we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because health and well-being, especially mental health, is definitely part of inclusion, being able to talk about our struggles, yet not in fear of losing your livelihood.
Exactly. And you had mentioned it's not only pilots, that could be paramedics, EMTs, doctors, anyone in the military. There was such a stigma. No, you're not depressed. You can't be depressed. You can't be anxious because, oh yeah, you just might lose your job. Thankfully, there's, the word is out there and it's a little more open to be able to speak about, not as much as it should be, but it's a little more open that people can talk about it. I talk about my own journey living with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress. So everybody will experience some sort of anxiety, especially pilots. My goodness, I can't imagine. And explain to us, as a pilot yourself for over 34 years, some of the stress that you may have felt upon yourself, not only just being a pilot, but all that goes with that. It's not just hopping in the plane and flying people here and there.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, it's no secret that being a pilot is one of the most dangerous and stressful jobs on the planet. I mean, that has been well documented. More so, the role of pilot that causes, or it's inherited stress because it is a high performance job. You always have to be on your toes for an emergency situation. I mean, that's what we're hired to do, to keep the airplane and the souls on board safe. What people don't know is that that's just our role, but we're looked at as superhumans. But we're not superhumans. We're humans. And humans, like me, you, and everyone, we all have stuff in our lives. We have divorce. We have death. We have stressors. We have financial problems. And pilots are known to be great compartmentalizers, like doctors, like lawyers, like nurses, like military people, but no one ever talks about when that compartment gets full. What happens once that compartment gets full and then something else is added, and then your cup or your container overflows, and then you act out on your behavior because there's so many stressors in that compartment, and everyone's capacity for stressors are different. Their compartments, some are large, some are small, but some start out with 3/4 of the way filled. Others start out with only half full. what makes something stress to me may not be for you. So it's all different. It's not one size fits all. So not only do we have this inherent stress of the role of pilot being stressful and danger, it's all the other things that are being piled onto us, plus the inherent stressful job that really has not been talked about. And I'm here to change that.
Now I know you've been, an advocate for pilots and female pilots as well, pilots all across the board in aviation community, for mental health. And I know that your voice is being heard, because in the last 6 months, I think you've spoken, well, you've spoken domestically as well as internationally. So share a little bit about some of the speaking engagements you've had.
Yes, I have been very honored, and it's been my privilege to be asked to speak on panels, to speak keynotes. In the last few months, I have traveled to Dublin, I've traveled to colleges, and next month I'll be traveling to Chile, Santiago, Chile, to talk at international conferences. But the last 2 months down in Orlando, I think it was in May, I spoke at, or maybe it was April, I can't remember, April or May, but I spoke at a Watts conference, and that's the World Training Summit. So airlines come from all over the world to come to this summit, and this year it was held in Orlando, and we were talking about the next generation of aerospace and what we're going to do and how we're going to train differently. And then I followed it up with going to Southern Illinois University, where I sat on a diversity panel, and we talked about how there are invisible barriers that women have to face in a male-dominated industry. And we talked about that a little bit and how that differs from our counterparts. And then next month, I am going to, as I said, going to Santiago, Chile, and we're going to talk about more training and how we can shape the training for the next generation. And following that, I'll be speaking and presenting at ASMA, that stands for Aerospace Medical Association, down in New Orleans, and I will be presenting a performance-based mental health and well-being curricula tailored for collegiate aviation students.
How awesome. How awesome. I think this is wonderful, and the world needs more of you to be out there doing what you're doing, because it's so incredibly important. And I can only imagine that if a pilot is struggling, and they're fearful to come forth and say, hey, I'm struggling, I'm not sleeping, I'm feeling anxious quite often. Do pilots turn to other, like, substance? Is there substance abuse or anything like that when they feel like they've reached this total, this wall, their compartment has completely overflowed?
Well, of course, there are those vices in any high performance or low performance roles. So there is some of that. There are vices, there are addictions, but it could be addictions from food addictions to sex addictions to a couple beers every night to not sleeping or watching your favorite show, binging and not getting enough sleep. So yeah, it's on the spectrum. There is a lot of behaviors that need to be addressed. And that's why I've been such a huge advocate for pilots being able to reach out when they can't handle those struggles alone. Then it's time to reach out for professional help. But while we wait for the regulations to change, the only thing we have in our control is our own will. And as a certified health coach, I go around the country and I talk about, until the regulations change, what can we do? And the 4 pillars, I call them the waypoints, are sleep, exercise, nutrition, and mindfulness meditation. Now, there are more, but those are the 4 foundational pillars to well-being. And yes, we've heard those all of our life, but how often have we honored them? How often do we know why we sleep? If we knew why we sleep, perhaps we would schedule our sleep better. And when I talk to students, they are amazed, or for that matter, professional organizations, they are amazed that every tissue, every organ in our body suffers if we don't get 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night, quality sleep. So those of us that are running around with 4 to 5 hours of sleep as a badge of honor, we're not doing anything more than damaging our bodies and our minds.
Yeah, we're not doing ourselves any favors.
No.
I'm one of those people that gets 5 or less hours of sleep a night.
We need to work on that for you, Kim.
I know. I am working. I am a work in progress, Renee.
As we all are.
Yes, we all are. Now, I want to talk about your book a little bit. Now, when was your book released?
It was released September of 2021.
Oh, okay. Awesome. So it's been out for a bit, and it's doing well. It's still out there and in people's faces, which is wonderful. What was the impetus that, that pushed you? You're just like, what? I've got to get something out there. I've got to get something out there. I have to do something. What made you want to write this book?
Well, one, I wanted to raise awareness, and the only way to do that is to write a book so I could go out to conferences like I've been and reference the book. So that was a big driving force to raise awareness to this topic that hasn't got the attention that it is due.
So you talked about, we were talking off mic before we started the show here. Explain to the listeners what a pilot has to do, like if they are feeling some sort of emotional turmoil in their life, some sort of turmoil, and they come forth and say, hey, you know what, I'm struggling. So currently, and in the last 10, 15 years, what has that process been for a pilot that approaches the higher up and says, hey, I'm struggling. I can't sleep and I'm super depressed. What was typically happening when someone came forth and shared those struggles?
Well, typically, let me just explain to your listeners what SSRIs are. SSRIs stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. The acronym is SSRIs, and they treat depression by increasing the levels of serotonin in the brain. Serotonin is one of the chemical messengers that carry signals, from from the brain to the rest of your body. So let's just put that aside for a moment. So if a pilot would flag themselves as struggling with a mental health issue, let's just say depression, he or she would be taken off the line immediately. And then the first step, before you would go to a psychiatrist who would be able to further evaluate you, you would talk to a talk therapist. And typically, if you talk to a talk therapist, they may be able to help you turn that corner. But there are certain percentages of people that need something more because, as I said, the serotonin is a neurotransmitter that carries the signals between our brain nerve cells, neurons. So the SSRIs, they block the reabsorption of serotonin into those neurons. So you don't want to take that step because it's a chemical that you put into your bloodstream, and you start out at a very low level, maybe 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams, and then it's constantly an adjusting. So if you go through step 1 as a pilot, you identify yourself, you're taken off the line. The second step typically is you go to talk therapy. And the third, if that's not working, you go, you see further evaluation, and that may or may not mean that you are prescribed an SSRI. Now, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're a nurse, that's not a problem. You can function very well on SSRIs. But for the pilot, here's the catch. Up until 2010, SSRIs were prohibited completely. You could not fly with taking an SSRI. And then 2010 came around and the FAA approved 4 SSRIs. But if a pilot could not take one of the 4, and I'm not going to get into which ones those are because it doesn't matter, but because, not one size fits all, if a pilot could not fit into one of those SSRIs, then they were grounded indefinitely.
Indefinitely. Wow.
Indefinitely, because they could not operate a piece of equipment because the regulations only have approved those 4. So it's like, okay, I can't take Advil. And if I was flying and the, FAA says, well, you can only take aspirin. Well, I can't take aspirin, but I can take Advil. But they say, no, you can only take aspirin. If I can't take aspirin, then you can't fly. So that's a simple comparison,
Right.
But that's essentially what they were saying, that you can only take these 4, and if you can't take these 4, then you can't fly. But that is changing.
And one thing, real quick, I want to clarify, because maybe the listeners aren't familiar with the terminology. You had said taken off the line. That's the same as being grounded, correct?
Correct.
Which means they cannot fly. So taken off the line means you are unable to fly.
Correct.
So back to what you just said, things are changing, and things have recently, very recently, as of today, which happens to the day of recording is May 12th. But share with the listeners the changes that are currently starting up right now.
Yes, I am really excited about this because our mission in the past 2 years, loud and clear, was to get the attention of the FAA and to convince them that they need to change these rules and regulations that were put in years ago that had no medical evidence. It was just carried over from the 1950s. We'll just call it not stigma, because the FAA always did encourage you to go and get help, but at what cost? So a pilot had to decide, do I come forward? Do I claim that I am struggling? But what if? The end game is, what if I can't take one of the 4? My livelihood, all the years that I have trained, the hours, the investment. And pilots, it's a very narrow profession. So if you lose your license to fly, the perception of a pilot is, where am I going to go get another job? That's the perception, perceived or not perceived. However, aviation industry is growing and there's a lot of jobs, but when you're in the mud, sometimes you only see so far ahead of you, and losing your job, your livelihood. And as pilots, it's true, part of our identity. It's very terrifying. But as of May the 10th, Dr. Susan Northrup and her team have officially announced that the FAA is in the process of changing the rules and regulations pertaining to mental health issues. And they have now approved 7 to the list that pilots can take if he or she needs to take that step forward with prescription intervention.
What an amazing thing, and you must be so excited, because for years you've been a voice out there saying, hey, this is needed. And then to finally see that come, how exciting.
I was so excited when I got the official news, and then it was in writing. I was jumping up and down. And don't get me wrong, there are many people out there advocating for this change. So it just goes to show you how a collective voice can really move a mountain when it's a force for good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Now you said jumping up and down. I'm going to share a little story. The last time I flew.
Yes.
Okay. And you and I have talked many times prior. So I kind of knew, what was coming when the pilot came over the loudspeaker. But, hey, I headed out west and super, just beautiful flight the whole way. Smooth, smooth, smooth. And then we get about 20 minutes out and the pilot comes across and says, okay, it's going to be a little bumpy. It'll be fine, but it may be bumpier than normal. And I always expect that going into where I was going because you're coming over mountains. So you always get a little turbulence. But I'd never ridden a crosswind. So, and I know you can't see her, but, Captain O'Shaughnessy is chuckling right now. So, you're bumping up and down, turbulence up and down. And then we hit that crosswind and you're not going up and down. The whole plane's shaking sideways. So you're going left to right, holding on to your seat. And I literally said loudly, whoo-wee, riding the crosswind.
Giddy up.
I was just holding on.
Yeah.
And there was a gentleman across the aisle from me, absolutely terrified. And I'm just hanging on. I started laughing. Maybe it was nervous laughter because I'd never been in it, but I knew what we were hitting and how we were coming in. So, and I'm assuming you have 34 years of flying, being a pilot. When you're a pilot and you have to ride a crosswind in, what does that do to you? Or do you just automatically go into gonna do this mode, and explain to people what a crosswind is? Because I'm sure others have experienced it and maybe they don't know what it was.
Yes, all good stuff. Yes, and that story, I'm sitting here smiling, and the whole time you're talking, I'm thinking, giddy up, because
Yeah.
that's essentially what we do. A crosswind is when you're coming in on a runway. Let's just say it's north-south. The runways are 360 and 00. We do it in numbers. So if you're landing to the north, when the wind is coming at the front of the airplane, that is how you land, is with the wind. And because with the controls, you manipulate the controls based on where the wind is coming from. In this case, we'll start off with the wind coming to the nose toward the airplane, and that is ideal. That is ideal because there's no crosswind. However, if you have a wind that's coming from 090 or 270, think of it as a circle, and north being 0, south being 180, east being 090, and west being 270. If you have a stiff crosswind from the left or the right, and not only are they, different airplanes have different limits for crosswind components. So a typical jet is 30 or 32 knots from either side. At least that's what the 767 was, or maybe it was 35. I can't remember. I've flown many airplanes, but it's right between that 30 and 35 direct crosswind. And so when you're coming into a runway that is straight ahead and you have that crosswind, if you don't compensate for the wind with your airplane, that wind, it's coming so strong against the side of the airplane that it's pushing you further away from the airplane to the 270. So you have to use your controls and sometimes turn the airplane sideways.
Woo-wee!
And you're coming into the runway literally sideways. And the last 100 feet, we call it, you kick the rudder You put in the aileron, and that straightens the nose of the airplane so you can flare and come down on the center of the runway, the center line, as we call it. So, does it get our adrenaline up? Absolutely, it does. It absolutely, but that's a good thing. That's called acute stress. And our bodies are very well equipped for acute stress. It's that chronic stress that lasts for days, months, years, that just chips away at us, that we have to be very careful of, like not sleeping, or
Right.
depression, or loss of a loved one. And as I said, someone that loses their dog, they could rebound maybe in a day, and others it takes years. I mean, there's just anything. It could be just anything.
Right. Yeah. Life happens. Life
Life
happens to all of us. Yeah.
Correct.
Well, Captain O'Shaughnessy, this has been awesome. And there's so much more that we could talk about. So that, well, we have to have you back on, is what we
Well,
have to do.
thank you. I'd love to come back on.
Absolutely. Love to have you come back on in a few months, hear more about where you're going in the next few months speaking, which is congratulations on all of those speaking engagements. And it is, what an honor for you to be able to go out there and share your voice with the community that you spent so many, well, decades, you spent decades in. So how awesome that you may be retired, but you're still looking out. And I think that's wonderful. So kudos to you and congratulations on everything that you have been doing. And I can only imagine that there's just amazing stuff in your future.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time to talk to you and your listeners, and I'd love to come back.
Awesome. Real quick, I always ask all of my guests to leave the listeners with a little nugget of hope, something that they can just tuck away in their pocket and take with them throughout the rest of the day. So what would your nugget of hope for the listeners be today?
Today is full of hope, because tomorrow is not promised.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thanks once again for being my guest. This has been an absolute pleasure. And everybody out there listening, thanks so much for tuning into another episode of Let Fear Bounce. This is Kim Langling, your host, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. So be well, stay well, and be blessed. That wraps up another episode of Let Fear Bounce, folks. Thanks so much for spending a small part of your day with myself and my special guests. I am blessed week by week by the people that I have on my show. I'm also blessed by you for tuning in and listening. And if you want to learn a little bit more about me, you can go to my website at kimlanglingauthor.com and check out everything else I'm doing. I like to keep myself busy. And until next week, folks, everybody be well, stay well, and be blessed. And don't forget, you are amazing.